I never thought I'd be that woman, you know, the one who finds herself tangled up in something she never saw coming. But here I am, recounting a tale that's more twisted than any soap opera. It started innocently enough, feeling like a ghost in my own home. My husband, once my rock, had become a stranger, lost in a virtual world of video games. Night after night, he'd be glued to the screen, and well, I felt invisible. It was during this haze of loneliness that I met Jake at work. He was new, funny, and had a way of making me feel seen. Our casual chats by the coffee machine turned into lunch outings. It was refreshing, having someone listen, really listen. I told myself it was harmless, just two colleagues enjoying each other's company. But who was I kidding? Deep down, I knew where this was heading. One lunch led to another, and before I knew it, we were at his hotel room under the pretense of a working lunch. I can't pinpoint the exact moment I crossed the line, but suddenly, there I was, in the middle of an affair. Juggling two lives was exhausting. At home, I played the role of a dedicated wife and mother, while secretly, I was someone else entirely. The guilt gnawed at me, yet the thrill of this new romance was intoxicating. The more I got involved with Jake, the more my home life seemed like a farce. My husband, oblivious to my emotional departure, continued his gaming marathons, further widening the chasm between us. Our conversations were reduced to logistical exchanges about groceries or the kids' schedules. And Jake? He was like a drug, an escape from reality. But as with any secret, the fear of getting caught started to loom over me. I began to feel the weight of my deceit, the double life taking its toll. Then came the day that changed everything. A seemingly normal day turned into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I had always managed to keep my two worlds apart, but that delicate balance was about to come crashing down. This chapter sets the stage for the unfolding drama, portraying the protagonist's inner conflict and the escalation of her extramarital affair, all while maintaining a facade of normalcy in her family life. It delves into her emotions and justifications, setting up a complex narrative of betrayal and self-discovery. You know how they say life doesn't come with a manual? Well, it sure doesn't come with a script for moments like these either. I found myself in a story I never planned to write, a tale of secret texts and guilt, hidden beneath layers of justifications. It all started with a simple belief: my husband, Mark, wouldn't notice. He was so absorbed in his own world, one where I no longer seemed to exist, except maybe as a background character. But who was I kidding? With every message I sent to Alex, my coworker, and now something more, a part of me crumbled under the weight of guilt. I told myself it was just a harmless escape. Mark, with his endless gaming sessions, had left me craving attention, and Alex was all too willing to fill that void. Our messages were our secret world, a place where I felt wanted and alive. Then came May the 4th, Star Wars Day. Alex and I had this inside joke about it, and I found myself eagerly sending him Star Wars gifts, chuckling at the thought of his reaction. But as I hit send, I caught a glimpse of Mark, lost in his game, oblivious to the world around him, including me. No gifts for him, no shared jokes. We were like two ships passing in the night, no longer on the same course. That's when I noticed it, a shift in Mark. He started watching me more closely, his usual indifference replaced by a quiet suspicion. I could feel his eyes on me, questioning, probing. Was it my imagination? Or had he started to sense the distance growing between us? The unraveling began on a Thursday evening. Mark had been quieter than usual, and I could sense something brewing beneath his calm exterior. My phone buzzed with a new message from Alex, a little too loud in the silent room. Mark's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "Who's that?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Just a work thing," I replied, my voice a little too high. I could feel the walls closing in, the secrets threatening to spill out. Later that night, as I lay in bed pretending to sleep, I heard the faint sound of Mark moving around in the living room. Curiosity overcame me, and I tiptoed out, only to find him with my phone in his hands, scrolling through the messages. The look on his face said it all: the hurt, the betrayal, the disbelief. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time stood still. "Is this why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Is this why you've been so distant? I had no words, no excuses that could mend the chasm that had opened up between us. The truth lay bare, ugly and undeniable. In that moment, I realized the gravity of my actions, the pain I had caused to the man I once promised to love and cherish. The room was filled with a deafening silence, a stark contrast to the chaos raging within me. This was it, the moment of truth, the point of no return. My secret was out, and with it, the life I had known was crumbling around me. Ever had that moment where your entire world just stopped spinning? That gut-wrenching, heart-stopping moment? I had mine. The day Mark confronted me with a truth I'd been denying even to myself. He stood there, holding my phone like a detective who just cracked a case, his eyes filled with a hurt that cut through me. "Is this you?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. I glanced at the screen, my heart sinking. There it was, the undeniable evidence of my betrayal, laid bare for him to see. My first instinct was to deny, to throw up a wall of lies. "That's not what it looks like," I stammered, but even to my ears, it sounded feeble, pathetic. He just shook his head, the pain in his eyes deepening. "How could you?" he whispered. The question hung in the air, heavy and accusing. I could see the trust we built over years crumbling in his gaze. I wanted to run, to hide, to do anything but face the reality of what I'd done. But there was nowhere to hide. The truth was out, piercing through the facade I'd maintained for so long. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, the words sounding hollow in the charged silence. Sorry, such a small word for the hurricane of hurt I'd unleashed. Mark looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the man I'd married, the man I'd shared my life with, the man I'd just broken. Why? It was more than a question. It was a plea for understanding, a search for some sense in the chaos I'd created. I tried to explain, to tell him about the loneliness, the disconnect, but the words sounded like cheap excuses even to me. The weight of my actions hit me then, a tidal wave of guilt and realization. I'd betrayed not just my husband, but my family, our history, our future. I watched as Mark's face transformed from hurt to resignation, the finality of it all etched in his expression. In that moment, I saw the full extent of the damage I'd caused, the ruin I'd brought upon us. I reached out to him, my voice barely a whisper. "Please, can we try to fix this? Can you ever forgive me?" But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something that scared me more than his anger, a deep, unspoken weariness, a resignation that spoke of a hurt too deep to mend. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard, a stark reminder of the distance that now lay between us. This confrontation was more than just a clash of truths. It was the unraveling of a life we'd built together, thread by painful thread. And as I stood there, with my heart breaking and my world collapsing, I realized the hardest truth of all. Some things, once broken, can never truly be mended. You never really think it'll happen to you, do you? The big D, divorce. It's something you hear about, something that happens to other people. But there I was, staring into the eyes of the man I'd loved for more than half my life, hearing him say the words that shattered my world. "I want a divorce." It's funny, in a tragic sort of way, how few words can change everything. Mark's refusal to even consider forgiveness cut deeper than any sharp words he could have hurled at me. His pain, raw and palpable, was a clear sign that the wound I'd inflicted was too deep. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice laced with a mix of fury and hurt. "I can't be with someone I can't trust." In that moment, the gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. The logistics of life without Mark. Who would help with the kids' endless needs? How would I manage the daily chaos of school runs and soccer practices? It was overwhelming, the sudden realization of how much I'd relied on him, not just as my husband but as my partner in the intricate dance of family life. I remember asking, almost pleading, "Can you at least help with the kids? With transportation?" It sounded pathetic even to me, but I was grasping at straws, trying to hold on to any semblance of normalcy in the tidal wave that was appending my life. Mark's response was a bitter laugh. "Why don't you ask your boyfriend to help?" he said, the sarcasm in his voice stinging like a slap. It was a low blow, but one I had left myself wide open for. The days that followed were a blur of legal consultations, tearful conversations with the kids, and sleepless nights filled with regret. I looked at our family photos, the memories of happier times, and it felt like watching a movie of someone else's life. How had it come to this? How had I let my momentary selfishness destroy the very foundation of my family? As I navigated the new reality of being a soon-to-be single mom, the challenges piled up. The kids' questions, their confused and hurt expressions, were a constant reminder of the chaos I'd cause. Why doesn't Daddy want to live with us anymore? They'd ask, and I'd struggle to find an answer that made sense. I'd lie awake at night, replaying everything, wondering if there was something I could have done differently, some way to undo the damage. But deep down, I knew it was too late for what ifs. The choices I'd made had set in motion a series of events that couldn't be undone. Looking back, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the logistical nightmare or the legal battles. It was the loss of the life I'd known, the future I'd envisioned with the man I thought I'd grow old with. It was the realization that some mistakes are too big to fix, and some bridges, once burned, turned to ashes, never to be crossed again. This chapter captures the emotional turmoil and practical concerns of the wife as she faces the reality of divorce and the consequences of her actions. It delves into her internal struggles, the dynamics of her relationship with her husband, and the impact of the impending divorce on her family life, painting a vivid picture of a life in upheaval. If you've enjoyed what you've seen and want to stay updated with more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and helps us to keep bringing you more of the content you love. Plus, subscribing ensures you won't miss out on any of our future updates. It's a win-win. Thanks for being a part of our community, and we can't wait to share more with you. Keep the likes and comments coming, and remember, every subscribe brings us closer to our next exciting update. So, what are you waiting for? Smash that subscribe button and join our growing family. You know how sometimes you wake up and for a fleeting second, everything seems normal, then reality crashes in, and you remember how your world's fallen apart. That was my every morning. The day Mark left, the echo of the closing doors seemed to reverberate through the empty halls of what used to be our home, our haven. I sat there, amidst the silence, the weight of my choices crushing me. I'd lost my husband, my best friend, our marriage, once a source of strength, lay in ruins because of me. The family photos on the wall mocked me with memories of happier times. It was like living in a house haunted by the ghost of us. In desperation, I reached out to friends and family. I needed someone to talk to, someone to tell me it was going to be all right. But the conversations were awkward, filled with unspoken judgments and pity. I could see it in their eyes, the "I told you so's," even if they never said it out loud. My sister tried to be supportive, but I could tell she was struggling to understand how I could have let this happen. Mark, on the other hand, became a stranger. He avoided any contact with me, communicating only through terse texts about practical matters, mostly concerning the kids. It was like talking to a cold, distant version of the man I once knew. Then came Christmas, and Mark agreed to come home for the kids. I had this foolish hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to be civil, for their sake. But the moment he walked in, the tension was palpable. The kids sensed it too, their excited chatter dying down as they picked up on the strained atmosphere. We went through the motions, unwrapping gifts, sharing a meal, but it was all just a charade. The kids would glance at us, their eyes darting back and forth, trying to read the situation. I tried to keep up a cheerful front, but my smiles were as hollow as the empty space where my wedding ring used to be. Dinner was the hardest. We sat at opposite ends of the table, the silence broken only by the occasional forced conversation about trivial things. Every word felt like tiptoeing through a minefield. I missed him, not just the man he was before all this, but the man he was when we first met, full of dreams and love. After dinner, Mark retreated to the guest room, and I lay in our bed, my bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was full, yet it felt so empty. I wondered if this was going to be our new normal, a family in the same house but living worlds apart. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling of regret that clung to me like a shadow. I thought about how things might have been different if I had made other choices, if I had been honest with myself and with Mark. But the sad truth was, you can't unring a bell. The damage was done, and all we had left were the echoes of a broken home and the faint hope that maybe, one day, we could find a way to heal, not just for us, but for our kids too. You'd think after everything, after the tears and the heartbreak, I'd have had the sense to cut all ties with Alex, well, my mistake. But the heart's a funny thing, isn't it? It doesn't always follow logic. Despite the storm I was living in, I kept in touch with him. It was like I was addicted to the very thing that was destroying my life. Then, as if I wasn't already knee-deep in a mess of my own making, Mark found out. He discovered I was still communicating with Alex. I'll never forget the look on his face when he confronted me. It was beyond anger, beyond hurt. It was a kind of resignation, the kind that said he'd had enough. He gave me an ultimatum. It's him or me, make your choice. His voice was cold, devoid of the warmth I'd fallen in love with years ago. I stood there, frozen, torn between the life I had built with Mark and this fantasy that had spiraled out of control. I remember looking into Mark's eyes, searching for a glimpse of the man I married. The man who used to look at me like I was his world. But all I saw was a stranger, hardened by betrayal and disappointment. And Alex? He was like a siren's call, tempting but ultimately leading me to rocky shores. The decision should have been clear, but my mind was a battlefield. The motions clashing and colliding in a relentless storm. I knew what I had to do, what I should do, but the heart and the head are two very different beasts. After days of sleepless nights, long walks, and countless tears, clarity finally came. It wasn't a grand revelation or a moment of epiphany. It was a quiet, painful acceptance that I had to let go of Alex, not just for my family's sake, but for mine too. So, I made the call that ended it all with Alex. We can't do this anymore, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It felt like I was closing a chapter of a book I should never have opened. Alex tried to protest, but I was firm. It was over. The decision, as right as it was, didn't bring the relief I had hoped for. Instead, it left a hollow ache, a sense of loss for something that had been so wrong yet had felt so right. But more than that, it left me with the daunting task of repairing the shattered pieces of my marriage. I approached Mark, my heart in my throat, my words a tangled mess of apologies and pleas for forgiveness. I've ended it with him, I said, my voice tinged with a desperation I couldn't hide. I want to make this right, if you'll let me. Mark didn't respond immediately. His silence was a gulf between us, filled with the echoes of our past mistakes. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, cautious. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, he said, and those words stung more than any outburst of anger could have. The path to redemption was a long one, strewn with the debris of broken trust and wounded hearts. But it was a path I knew I had to walk, not just for Mark, not just for our kids, but for myself. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it, for better or for worse. There's a moment in every story where you realize there's no going back, no matter how much you wish you could. For me, that moment came crashing down the day Mark found out I hadn't really ended things with Alex. The look in his eyes was something I'll never forget. It was like watching the final thread of our connection snap. He didn't yell or scream. He just looked at me, and in that look, I knew. I knew it was over. I'm filing for divorce, he said, his voice steady but distant. It was a tone I'd never heard from him before, one that sealed our fate with a finality that left me reeling. And so, the wheels of our undoing began to turn. Lawyers, paperwork, and the heart-wrenching discussions of custody arrangements. Our home turned into a battleground. Every conversation and negotiation. The kids, God bless them, were caught in the middle of a war they didn't start. The worst part? It didn't stay within the four walls of our crumbling home. It spilled over into my work life. Whispers in the break room, sympathetic looks that felt more like judgment. I could feel the weight of my colleagues' stares, their unspoken thoughts creating a barrier I couldn't break through. But the isolation wasn't just at work. Friends I'd known for years, friends I thought would be there through thick and thin, started to drift away. Invitations dried up, Phone calls went unreturned. I understood their disapproval, but it didn't make the sting any less painful. It's a strange thing, feeling like a pariah in a community you once called home. In the middle of it all, the custody battle turned into a war of attrition. Mark wanted full custody, and truth be told, I couldn't blame him. I was the one who'd broken our family, but the thought of losing my kids was a blow I couldn't. Every meeting with my lawyer left me feeling hollow, like I was fighting a losing battle against my own guilt and the consequences of my actions. The court dates were the worst. Sitting there, in that sterile room, listening to lawyers paint pictures of our lives in the most unflattering of lights. I had to sit quietly as my character was dissected, all my mistakes laid bare for a room full of strangers to judge. Throughout it all, the most painful thing was the loss of what we'd once had. I'd lie awake at night, replaying our happy memories, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. The laughter, the love, the shared dreams, all replaced by legal documents and cold, emotionless negotiations. As I signed the papers that would officially end our marriage, I realized the full extent of what I'd lost. Not just a husband, not just friends, but a part of myself, a part one wasn't sure I could ever get back. The finality of it all was overwhelming, a chapter closing with a deafening silence that echoed with the remnants of a life I once knew and loved. In the end, I was left with a reflection of the person I'd become, a person I hardly recognized. The road ahead was uncertain, paved with regret and the daunting task of rebuilding not just my life, but the trust and love of my children. It was a journey I had to take, one painful step at a time, in the aftermath of a storm I had created. You know that saying, hindsight is 20/20. Well, it's painfully true. Sitting in the empty house, now void of Mark's presence, the silence was deafening. It was in this silence that the magnitude of my actions truly hit me. The affair, the lies, the hurt I caused, it all came crashing down, leaving me buried under a mountain of regret. This realization led me down a path I never thought I'd take, therapy. It was a strange feeling, pouring out my heart to a stranger, dissecting every choice I'd made. But as the sessions went on, I began to understand the why behind my actions. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a start to healing, to becoming someone better than who I'd been. The therapy sessions were like a mirror, reflecting not just the person I had become, but also the person I wanted to be. It was during one of these sessions that I first voiced the thought of a new beginning, a life beyond the ruins of my marriage, a chance to rebuild, not just for my kids or for Mark, but for myself. One of the hardest parts was moving forward without Mark. The day he packed up his last box and closed the door behind him marked the end of our shared life. Watching him leave, I felt a mix of sorrow and release. It was over. Our story, which had started with so much love and hope, had come to its final, inevitable conclusion. In the following weeks, the house felt both oppressively large and suffocatingly small. The memories were in every corner, in every shared space where laughter had once echoed. I'd walk into a room and half expect to see Mark there, only to be met with the stark reality of his absence. But it wasn't just about coping with the loss, it was about learning from it. I spent hours reflecting on my choices, the moments where I could have chosen differently. The pain I caused wasn't just a wound on my family, it was a wound on my own soul, one that needed time and care to heal. The path to self-forgiveness wasn't easy. There were days when the guilt was overwhelming, when the what ifs and if onlys played on a loop in my mind. But through therapy, I learned to face these thoughts, to accept them and learn from them. As I started to envision a life after my marriage, the future was both terrifying and liberating. I was stepping into uncharted territory, a single woman with a past that was a tapestry of love, mistakes, and lessons. The thought of starting over, of building a new life from the ashes of the old, was daunting. But it was also an opportunity, a blank slate on which to write a new chapter.